and brand consultant specialising in millennial and Gen Z culture. She has worked in the beauty industry for almost a decade, was founding editor of Days Beauty, and consultant for industry heavyweights, there's lots of them, so I'm going to have to read them. Beautycon, Estée Lauder, Boots, Feel Unique, Milk Makeup, Flannels Beauty, and the Unseen Beauty, so lots of experience. And she has a focus on female empowerment and women's empowerment, and she's departed from the beauty industry in 2019 and to become a founding member of the Stack World and the Restless Network, so reimagining social media to platforms creating kind of safe digital spaces for women. In 2021, she was headhunted to support UN Women UK in their digital campaigns, creating safer public spaces for women and marginalised genders across the country. So today she'll be talking about her new book, Pixel Fresh, which is how the toxic beauty culture harms women. And we're really excited to hear your talk. So let's mix it down, and then it's over to you.
Thank you. Hi everyone, thank you for coming. Thank you for the introduction as well. Like I said, I have an intro slide, which is everything. It's just well read out to you. But I wanted to tell you a little bit how I came to writing the book. So I'm a writer, I'm also a former beauty industry insider. I've been called a whistleblower by the Times. I don't necessarily know if that's entirely true. But I was working in the beauty industry in almost every role you can think of. I started off in salons, I went into being an editor at a beauty platform. I ended up working at a beauty tech company before I left, and the company was about beauty treatments, and we were booking beauty treatments through images. So nail art, cool hairstyles, party makeup, that kind of thing. If you saw like an image on Instagram, instead of just being like, I want this and taking it to any beauty professional, you could book it via the app. That was initially the plan. Very quickly though, and it seemed almost overnight, the beauty industry shifted slightly, and all of a sudden it went from cool nail art to injectables, Botox, filler, and instead of pictures of nail art, we had pictures of noses, lips, cheeks, chins, and girls could essentially buy a face on our app. We went on a company retreat to Spain after we raised £4 million in investment, and as part of that we had to, one of our kind of senior people came up with a session where we would come up with kind of the worst things our company could do, so that we could build some better tech in response. I don't know why he thought it was a good idea. My idea was that with the algorithms that we were building, we could eventually drive algorithms that said, all the girls in this area are buying this nose, so you should buy it. All the girls in this area have these lips, so you should buy it. We could essentially incite trends en masse in specific areas so that each people had different faces, and then we could, on a whim, decide that that wasn't cool anymore, change them, and redirect the trends. And then I realised that was kind of already happening, and 3 weeks after that trip, I quit my job with no job to go to in 2019, right before the pandemic, which maybe wasn't a good idea. But I started to think about the industry that I'd ended up in. I kind of ended up in beauty by accident. I had blogged my entire teenage life. I was born in 1995, which is the same year that the World Wide Web was also born. And I felt like I grew up with every social media platform as they happened, documented so much of my teenage years online, and then ended up in beauty as a result. And I started to question how I'd got here, why I was in this space, how much the messages of empowerment that were kind of surrounding me were actually true, how empowered women were by what we were doing, and how I could be part of this in a positive way. And then I started writing this book as kind of in service of answering those questions. And it wasn't just, the fact that I felt like I was living in a beauty Black Mirror episode that was unfolding before my eyes, but also the fact that I felt at the time, and it's still the case, there was kind of this narrative that beauty culture was fixed, that feminism was done, that everyone was feeling great about themselves, everyone was body positive, everyone was empowered, and we'd solved beauty culture, that issues like that happened in the 90s, girls were fine now. And actually, I was working in some of the most feminist institutions in the country. I was working with the UN. I was working with these digital platforms that were looking to, change the world and make safe spaces for women. And these were incredibly intelligent, incredibly, capable, brilliant women. And I was still constantly hearing conversations about food groups we couldn't eat, how much weight we had to lose by a certain holiday. I need to raise money for this project, therefore I have to have all these treatments done, or look this way, I have to present in this very specific way in order to get opportunities, or girls editing, have to edit their pictures in order to post them online, to present in a very specific way to get even a certain level of respect. I was meeting teenage girls, who'd already started injecting their faces in order to feel beautiful or to keep up with the trends. And I was starting to get really terrified. And so I started to kind of look at those questions kind of around empowerment, around how beauty was empowering. And this is the quote that opens my book. This is the epigraph. Virginia Woolf said, telling the truth about my own experiences as a body, I do not think I solved. I doubt that any woman has solved it yet. The obstacles against her are still immensely powerful, and yet they are very difficult to define. And that still rang true. I felt like even the most bright and brilliant women around me were still grappling with how much to care about beauty, how they felt about their bodies, if they were allowed to care, the power that kind of derived from beauty and what they were supposed to do with it. And so I started to speak to the women closest to me. And then that project quite quickly expanded, and I reached out to women across the world in order to try and tell the truth about our experiences as bodies, about our experiences as women, and our experiences with beauty. And the result is my book, which I interviewed over 100 women. There's over 60 in the book. Each chapter is a different theme. So there's one on motherhood, there's one on sex, there's one on violence, there's one on cosmetic surgery, there's one on faces, and each one tells the stories of different women around the world as narrative non-fiction. So I wanted it to read a bit like a book of short stories, sometimes sci-fi-esque, sometimes dystopian, but all real and all happening now. And the theme of York Festival is all about power, the power of, it's kind of the brief I was given. So I wanted to talk to you about what I've learned about the power of beauty, the power of beauty culture, the power that we derive from it, how much of that power is ours, whether we are truly empowered or not, and the power that we maybe do have to make meaningful change for the women and girls around us. And I wrote about young women and girls, and I focused on young women and girls, not because men and boys aren't suffering in any way, but because it's young women and girls that are the most at risk right now. They're the demographic that uses social media the most. They're the demographic most likely to take and post selfies. As young girls, we learn very early on that beauty matters more than anything, that it's the first dimension of the feminine gender role, that is our power, that is our currency, is almost entirely rooted in the way we look, that to be beautiful is to be loved, it's to be special, it's to be good. The amount of women I interviewed that talked about not being the pretty one amongst their sisters, and how much that hurt them as they were growing up. And beauty has power, and digital culture is only amplifying that, it's only making that more intense. We live in a ever visual society and ever visual culture. We're surrounded by more images than you were probably ever meant to see, more beautiful people than you were ever meant to see, as the algorithms kind of surface a very specific look online. Meta's own research has concluded that their platforms are harmful and toxic for young girls specifically. 83% of women say that social media is negatively impacting their self-esteem, and the number of girls between 11 and 21 that feel the need to be perfect is rising and rising every year. It's now over half of children feel they need to be perfect in order to, go out of the house. So we've kind of reached this point with digital beauty culture where we kind of have to decide what to do with the power that it has and the power it has over our lives. And when I interviewed Claire Barnett, who's the former executive director of UN Women UK, she kind of said that. She was like, we're at this point where we're standing in a doorway, and on one side is, a relationship with our bodies that's, healing and achieves gender equality, and on the other side lies the destruction of women's physical and mental health. Like, we have to choose now which way we're going to walk. And so with all this kind of empowerment messaging that I was feeling everywhere, it's kind of this negation of beauty culture and the power it has. It was kind of this idea that feminism was done, that we'd kind of achieved our job, that we'd got the rights in law that we'd fought for centuries, and everything was fine. And it kind of felt like, and with the women I was speaking to, it kind of felt like this weird form of social gaslighting where you're told everything's fine and you're really empowered and everything's great, but you still kind of feel weird and uneasy inside. You still don't quite know how to have a relationship with your body. You still don't quite know whether you feel safe or not. You still don't quite know how best to act. You're kind of confused about the value you place on beauty, on your desire to be desired, whether you should be allowed to have a quick fix or whether we should focus on this kind of long-term struggle. And I've kind of found that to exist as a young woman today, you're kind of surrounded by these paradoxes. You're kind of stuck in this liminal space. We're in a world that criticises a beauty standard while still upholding it. It's unhealthy, like we're all kind of looking at these images knowing how bad they are for us, but painfully aware that that's the best way to thrive. That is a currency online. It's resenting those images and then continuing to replicate them. It's knowing that they're not real, but still holding yourself to that standard. It's to be empowered figuratively, but not necessarily literally. When I was interviewing young women and girls, that kind of word empowerment came up all of the time. Kind of everything was described as empowering, from getting Botox to cosmetic surgery, dieting, all of these things described as empowering. It's like, I earn good money. Why can I not I should be seen to be looking after myself. Very interesting language around that. Boost my confidence, I should invest in my image. Again, that word investment is a really interesting one, came up over and over again. But they also kind of told me that once they started, they couldn't really stop, that they found it really hard to, once they fixed one part of themselves, they were offered another part that was still, not quite right. Instead of kind of applying this forensic lens that we've been taught to have to a wider society, to a culture, they were just applying it to themselves. And it was becoming increasingly intense the deeper they went. And what's interesting is that, Naomi Wolf argued this in The Beauty Myth, that, as women gain more and more freedom in society, the more beauty culture constricts us, the more we get constrained. That, women have more money, more power, more scope, more legal recognition than we've ever had before. But in terms of how we feel about ourselves physically, we may actually be worse off than our unliberated grandmothers. And that's something that applied in my research. The more women gained in political, economic or sexual autonomy, the more the ideal kind of tightened its grip. Corsets and restrictive shapewear were replaced by diet and exercise, but today, in this kind of digital culture, they've compounded. We have more rights and more autonomy than ever before, but now we have to focus on wellness, shapewear, eating clean, as well as an ideal that requires cosmetic surgery, injectables and enhancements in order to be achieved. The idea stays unchanged, which is that to achieve this standard, to be worthy, to be respected, you have to change in some way in order to achieve it. You have to invest time, money and energy of varying degrees in order to gain power. It's interesting, the language of empowerment, it was kind of co-opted by a campaign that we all know and love in the 1970s. It's L'Oreal's Because You're Worth It campaign was kind of the first time we saw this in beauty culture. And they actually did it because they wanted to sell more products than Clairol, which was their competitor at the time. But even now, we kind of see media, marketing, messaging that kind of instructs us to love ourselves by buying a variety of products and kind of focusing on these very individualized acts of empowerment. It's like, if you buy this product or you post this selfie or you wear this t-shirt that says self-love on it or whatever, everything's going to be fixed. We're kind of encouraged to do that, to purchase things, to focus on individual acts, as opposed to kind of looking at a wider picture and fighting for structural change. We're kind of taught to compete against each other. We're taught to, pit against each other instead of working in collaboration. We place blame and we assign punishment to one another and ourselves, as opposed to we're taught we have to glow up, as opposed to kind of looking at the structures that are making us feel like that to account. So yeah, empowerment came up over and over and over and over again. Everything described as empowerment, and it started to feel a bit meaningless. It started to just feel like a way to say, I don't really want to talk about this anymore, or I don't really have an answer beyond, this. It was kind of a blanket term for it makes me feel a bit better for a bit, but still I feel this kind of swirl of anxiety and insecurity and like uncertainty beneath, and this is a little bit of a blanket kind of band-aid cover up. And the more I heard it, especially from kind of teenage girls, it started to just feel quite ominous. It just started to feel quite scary, because it's a deflection, it was a filter, it was an act of concealment, it was a way of saying, I don't want to talk about this anymore, and this can't go any deeper. And it was a way of not confronting the very real power that these structures have on our lives, and instead focusing and turning in on the self. And what was interesting and what was even more scary is that these conversations around empowerment and beauty and injecting your face and doing all of these things to yourself kind of came in line with a time where our actual power, the power that we have over our bodily autonomy, rights to contraception, access to abortion, safety from violence, was being revoked across the world. We were kind of being preoccupied with this sense of freedom over our bodies in terms of physical perfection, whilst actual powers were being stripped away by governing structures. There's a feminist writer called Andrea Dworkin who said beauty standards define precisely the dimensions of women's physical freedom. Look at Kylie Jenner. Even billionaires aren't free. We can't buy our way out of this culture. And the language of empowerment and choice is just being used to kind of cover up the harm that women are experiencing under modern beauty culture. We're sold these cosmetic enhancements as a tool for empowerment, but these kind of ever-intensifying beauty standards are just reinforcing gender inequality. And what's worse is we're made to feel like we're winning and everything is going really well. And I understand, and I've got this from so many of the interviews and from my own personal feelings as well, it's really difficult to differentiate views you genuinely hold from those that are kind of forced on you by external structures. It's almost impossible. We kind of have to hold these two things in our hands at the same time, which is that, yes, we can have autonomy and agency and ability, but we can also have huge forces making us feel a certain way about ourselves that stand to profit from self-loathing, self-surveillance, and our subsequent self-sabotage. And to admit that we're not cured of that isn't some kind of fundamental flaw in our intelligence or in our womanhood. It's a very necessary step in assigning accountability to those structures. And one woman I interviewed, Sean Fay, who's a very, very articulate and amazing trans activist. She wrote a book called The Transgender Issue, which has done incredibly well. But she said, which I thought was really pertinent, which was that saying you can be emancipated through beauty culture is almost like saying it feels good to take a corset off. Yes, it feels good, but it feels good because you've been constrained. What we're trying to do is find a livable, breathable way to exist in the system that's constraining us. And what's cruel about beauty culture ultimately is that it's defined by rarity. In any given period, the beauty standard has served the most privileged, it's served the ruling classes. As soon as beauty becomes attainable, as soon as the masses can adhere, it has to change in order to maintain its kind of elusive, kind of exceptional nature. So as soon as most of us have caught up, as soon as a lot of these teenage girls have or spent their money on Groupon kind of buying these deals to inject their faces, or people have gone on intense diets or, invested money in changing, as soon as we catch up, the goalposts move. And most of us, I think, are kind of either ultimately going to be disappointed or kind of left, swept to the side. So, there is obviously huge power in beauty as a form of self-expression. I've worked in salons, I've worked in beauty, like I know that. But much of the work that we're doing right now is kind of the antithesis of creative freedom. A lot of what we're doing is constructing an aesthetic of homogeneity. It's cookie cutter faces, it's Instagram face, it's, oh my god, all my favourite celebrities now look identical. And there's studies that have proven that. They've shown that the most successful women online kind of posture themselves in nearly identical ways. They almost have exactly the same facial features. There is a very real currency attached to kind of buying into this homogenous aesthetic right now. And I would argue, like from my research, I've met primary school girls who were talking about what cosmetic surgery they would get done. I've met teenage girls with a charity I work with in North London, one 14-year-old girl turned to me whilst all her friends were nodding along like, yeah, this is correct, as she told me that she doesn't go outside after school anymore because she doesn't want people to see her real face any more than they already have to, as if subjecting them to a natural teenage girl's face was somehow a horrifying experience. And they show me their feeds, and they're just, filtered and glowy and terrifying. But yes, I would argue that we are not necessarily as empowered as the messaging might seem when that is the case. And the hard thing is when we feel like our physical appearance is the only way we can get currency, as I mentioned at the beginning. If that feels like the main way we can negotiate power, that's where the problem lies. And one of the girls I interviewed for the book, an incredible young black girl who uses her platform to talk about the issues that she faces and educate people, she described beauty as a pathway to freedom, as a way of using what you have as a negotiation of power, whether that's wearing a weave or a wig, or whether that's wearing makeup or getting your nails done for a job interview. It's about using what you have in order to obtain freedom. And an increasingly visual digital culture where image is everything, that kind of currency that beauty has is only gaining value. We know that to have beauty means you can have more types of wealth. Like the more beauty you have, the more wealth you can accumulate. And so a point I really tried to get across in my book is that our beauty work and our response to beauty is a completely rational one. It really makes me angry when people try and label beauty work or even discussion around beauty culture as frivolous or trivial or something silly that girls engage with that doesn't need to be taken seriously. It's completely false. They live in a world that tells them that to be beautiful is the most important thing. We know that to be attractive, to be considered beautiful, leads to more desirable outcomes. There's a halo effect around beauty. To be beautiful is to have increased credibility, power, status. It's to have better employment outcomes, better health outcomes. It's to be more trusted. It's to be considered more credible. So we know that there's benefits attached to being beautiful. And it can create kind of palpable disparities in wealth and opportunity online and off. So the pursuit of beauty is entirely rational. But the power we gain from beauty, as a lot of discussions around beauty culture, is fraught with paradoxes. We face so many contradictions when it comes to beauty work as women. If we fail at beauty conformity, you're kind of powerless and then condemned as ugly. If you succeed, it's kind of you've succeeded on the terms of a structure that you don't have any control or say over. If you do too much beauty work, you can be shunned to the side for either being, often people read that as dishonest or, of a lower class status. If your beauty work is too overt, you can be seen, dismissed as caring too much about beauty. But then if you don't do enough, it's like you're not looking after yourself, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not showing up in a professional way. So you're constantly walking this tight line of beauty and power, where it kind of feels like there's often eternal damnation at either side. And I thought about Annabelle's kind of freedom too a lot during my research. And when I spoke to Claire from UN Women, who I mentioned at the beginning, she talked about how it's really important to distinguish freedom from and freedom to, and how we need both of those things in order to achieve, freedom in general. But that social media, beauty, digital culture, beauty culture, allow us freedom to do things. They allow us the freedom to express ourselves. They allow us freedom to curate our worlds and decide how we want to present in the world. They allow us freedom to negotiate in these structures. But they don't allow us freedom from the oppressive structures. They don't allow us freedom from, the bias, the bigotry that's kind of part of the fabric of the code of our society. And so, as we gain kind of more power in the world, beauty standards are more prescriptive than ever. The gender status quo is largely still present, if not worsened in that way. And we're being told all the time by a digital beauty culture that disempowerment is power. And I would argue there's kind of no real good systems in a game that's rigged from the beginning. We kind of have to dismantle the entire board. So if I've learnt anything over the course of this research, and sorry if it's getting depressing, it's going to pick up in a bit, it's that everyone's just tired. Like, I'm tired. I had to research this for 2 years. Tired of feeling this way, tired of having to think about all these things all the time, of having to juggle like that tightrope of walking on it all day, every day. Like, how many feminist debates am I going to have to wrangle in my head before lunchtime? Like, can I feel like this? Am I allowed to feel like that? Am I not? Like, what's acceptable when it comes to thinking and feeling about my own body and what I do with my own body and what's not? Just kind of tired of all of it. But the notion of empowerment, I think, is one thing that's just obscuring the reality, which is that there's these huge forces that are profiting from kind of breaking us down in order to be rebuilt in the image of the ideal. And I wanted, as Virginia Woolf wanted, to be able to tell the truth about my experience as a body, for the women around me, for the women I interviewed, to be able to tell their truth about the experiences as a body, to kind of find solidarity in that way, to unmask the dystopia that we kind of live in, the absurdities that are happening every day, and confront this culture with a critical lens. And that's what the book does. Is there's no filter over, any of the stories. There's no attempt to tell kind of noble lies about where we are. At times it's uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's not pretty, but I think it's necessary and it's honest and it's as close to the truth as I could get. Bell Hooks wrote that feminist ideology should not encourage, as sexism has done, women to believe they are powerless. It should instead clarify for women the powers they exercise daily and show them ways these powers can be used to resist sexist domination and exploitation. And at times, writing this book, I was really overwhelmed. I was like, this issue is huge. Like, I am just a girl. Like, I can't untangle this. I felt angry. I felt let down. I was just like, I can't believe I've signed a contract that says I'm going to deliver this, because how am I supposed to fix the world? And I kind of put all this pressure on myself. But every time I would feel like that, it wouldn't last for very long, because then I would have another interview. I'd interview another woman who'd offered to give her story to me in service of sorority, who would kind of give me her soul on a plate. And those conversations were such a lifeline. They were, I've never felt more inspired by women and their power and their honesty and their candour and their ability to be vulnerable and show up for one another than I did writing this book. I've never felt more seen and more understood, more heard. I've shared parts of myself that I never thought I would share in this book, that were never meant to be in the book, because so many women just gave me stories that, they'd never told anybody. Once you create that safe space to tell the truth, to actually acknowledge how you might be feeling about yourself, it became really beautiful. And I kind of realised in those, however many hours I spent listening and sharing on Zoom or in person with women around the world, why these structures are so intently fixated on keeping us focused on ourselves, on stopping that collaboration, on stopping, demonising gossip and stopping us from acting as a collective. And it's because when we come together, or when I came together with these women, you kind of realise that we don't need beauty or technology as new forms of spirituality. What we need is each other. We need touch, we need connection, we need affirmation, we need support. We don't need to spend money to harm ourselves or starve ourselves or fixate on our features. We just need each other. And I do believe as a collective we have power to create a more beautiful future for all of us. And so the issue is systemic and structural, and yes, that is true. But if you kind of think like that, then we won't get anything done, because you just go, I don't own Facebook and I didn't invent racism, so I don't know how to fix this anymore. But yes, the intersecting forces of patriarchy, capitalism, ableism, racism, ageism, all of them are huge, and they're directly responsible for our experience of beauty, and they won't be neutralised overnight. But what we can contribute to is our collective well-being, and I believe we have huge amounts of power and huge amounts of influence in our communities, both online and off. We follow influencers online, but I don't think enough of us realise how influential we are in the lives of our friends, sisters, cousins, daughters, etc. You possess the power to change the settings for them and to render an image that's safer and more beautiful than the one before. And whilst we can't expect a single woman to kind of shoulder that burden alone, and it is really hard to think about how you can do that by yourself, but we can do it together. And I think with our arms around each other, you can make that burden lighter. But we need to focus our collective bandwidth on something that feels more meaningful to care and support each other where our systems don't. So it's about using our relative power to tear up that system and to disrupt the very fabric of the code. And if that sounds really impossible, it's because it does feel like that sometimes, but we can't afford for things to stay the same. And feminism ultimately is not about women making individual choices, it's about liberation from patriarchy, and that can be radical and political and sometimes not very pretty at all. And so my book is a rallying cry for kind of a true collective mindset, one that we have to live and breathe, and that I promise and hope will be more beautiful than any kind of quick fix can make you feel. So, to give you some action points of the powers that we do have, as bell hooks so well said, we must do. There's more of these in the book, but just to summarise, one of them is relegating beauty with a capital B to the background of our lives. I say beauty with a capital B because I think there's definitely two types of beauty. I was saying before, I interviewed a woman called Chloe Cooper-Jones, who's an academic in New York, but she's also a disabled woman, and she was saying how much it annoys her when people say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because as a disabled woman, she's like, it's not though. My experience of beauty has created very real discrimination for me throughout my life. I'm not seen as a human often because I don't adhere to this beauty standard. So beauty with a capital B, not beauty as in sunshines and rainbows and flowers, but beauty as industry, beauty as politics. Relegating that to the background of our lives. Making it the elevator music, not like the motor that keeps us going up and down all the time. And we can do that in quite a few ways. It's been proven how much power we have with the women and girls around us, but if you think even about when you greet another woman, often the first thing you say is, oh my god, you look amazing, you've lost so much weight, your hair looks lovely. Like, we're kind of constantly, we put beauty as primary focus. We constantly reinforce beauty as the most important thing. It's the first thing we talk about, quipping about weight loss or greeting someone and apologising for your hair. Like, oh my god, I washed my hair today, or like, sorry, just don't look at this, don't look at my outfit. Constantly reinforcing beauty instead of saying something like, I missed you so much, or oh, I've been so looking forward to seeing you. I saw the work that you've been doing and it's amazing. I've been so looking forward to talking to you. I missed your company. Little things like that make such a huge difference, and studies have shown how impactful those overhearing even those conversations can be on the women around you. Even if you've been out for dinner and you kind of overheard people around you being like, oh, I'm not eating dessert because I'm blah blah, and you're like, oh, I can't have dessert now, and all you wanted to get was 2 cheesecakes. We have power. The second thing is to default to allies over enemies. Again, going back to, there's a lot of stuff in my book about why women are pitted against each other in competitions of beauty. But these actions can be really small. I think often we're told to kind of glare at other women across the void and be like, oh, she shouldn't be wearing that, or like, oh, I wouldn't have paired those sandals with that dress, or oh, she should have. Often your first thought is the one that's been instilled in you by a wider culture, so it's like, oh, she should have had a pedicure before she wore those sandals, or whatever. And we're kind of taught to resent other women for these things, or to kind of instantly try and pick them apart to make ourselves feel better. So the actions can be small. Smile at other women across the street, don't glare at them. Assume that other women are feeling just as vulnerable and tired and in need of connection as you are, because I've interviewed over 100 of them and spoken to so many more, and that's kind of the default I'm getting. Default to allies over enemies, and kind of recreate the magic of like a nightclub bathroom in every interaction that you have, because those are the most sacred spaces in the world. There's a whole scene in my book about nightclub bathrooms, because I was like, but the patriarchy doesn't exist in there, does it? It's just like, you look gorgeous, you look gorgeous. Also on this point, kind of making decisions with your sisters, your daughters, your cousins, your friends in mind, rather than acting in the interest of self. So being the woman that maybe you needed to see when you were younger, and trying as much as possible not to add to a noise that says, it's already so loud, that says beauty is pain, you are defective by default, you have to change what you are in order to be worthy, in order to be beautiful. You have to spend money in order to leave the house. Act for the collective, dress for the female gaze, wear glitter, eat the croissant. And when I was selling this book to publishers, one of the women I spoke to, who worked at the publishers was like, every day I walk past this bakery on the way to work and they have the most amazing pastries, and every day I tell myself I can't have it because it's too many calories and I'm not allowed to have that croissant. And she said, I read your book proposal and I went out the next morning and I had a croissant and it was fucking amazing. And she was like, it was the best croissant I've ever had. And another girl was like, yeah, and I took my Zoom filter off. Like, I realised I'd had a filter over my Zoom calls for like 2 years, and I just put it on one day and didn't think anything of it. She's like, I took it off. It's little things like that. I think we can all start to make small changes instead of thinking like, I have to now go, everyone has their thing. For some people it's not going out without makeup on, for some people it's not straightening their hair, or and eating a certain amount of food. That everyone has that boundary that they know is uncomfortable for them, or that's where kind of their level of discomfort starts. And I think it's about acknowledging that and kind of making steps towards that. And sometimes those steps can be as small as taking off. Do one less thing. Take off the Zoom filter, eat the croissant, don't edit your picture, delay the Botox appointment by a few months, wear the swimsuit, don't put the cushion over your belly when you're sat down, because we all do that. Go and hold your clutch bag like this. Breathe out. Little things. Modelling comfort. Modelling comfort again for friends, like finding what feels desirable to you, returning beauty to that realm of self-expression as it was when we were kids, just like smearing paint and glitter everywhere. On this point as well, next point, action over aesthetics, or embodiment over aesthetics. There's a study by the University of Sussex where they put women and girls, and then men and boys in front of mirrors, and they asked them to describe their bodies. One of the findings from that was that women tend to break their body down into a series of like pull apart components that are either fine or horrendous. So it's like my arms, hate them, my legs are okay, my stomach, I don't like that, and maybe like one or two things that are like maybe good. But there's kind of this extensive list of like detailed body parts. Men tend to look in the mirror and just see a holistic being. They don't tend to break themselves apart. Every single man in that study described their body in terms of what it could do, in terms of action. Like my arms are strong and I can run. Not a single woman did. Every single woman in that study talked about their body in terms of a decorative object, in terms of the value it had as a kind of commodity or something that should be beautiful and looked at. So really focusing on the way we talk about ourselves, kind of noticing when we're thinking about our bodies and the things that we think about, steering that conversation away from I hate how this looks and redirecting into my body allows me to, or I love that my arms can. There's a psychology professor called Dr. Renee Engelm, I think you pronounce her name. She wrote a book called Beauty Sick, and she said that data from that study was the happiest data she'd ever seen in her lab. Not only did it provide kind of short-term boost in kind of how you feel about yourself, but it also provided long-term protective benefits against future negative thoughts. So trying to kind of retrain our brains to adopt that mode of thinking, and also to the younger girls around us. Often, we kind of default to saying to young girls, you look so pretty, you look so cute. Whereas boys are like, you're so strong, and like that messaging is hugely powerful. So kind of trying to redirect when we do, and celebrating young girls for, their uniqueness, their confidence, their intelligence, their value kind of beyond the aesthetic, which goes into my final point, which is about nurturing yourself in every dimension. I talk a lot in my book about how women had to fight to exist in 2D, and then we had to fight to exist in 3D, so we had to fight to take up space and be kind of 3D objects in a room. Then we have to fight to exist in 4D, to age in time. And all the while we're kind of focusing on ourselves as these very two-dimensional beings that kind of our pleasure doesn't matter, the way we feel doesn't matter. We're constantly monitoring and adapting our bodies for the safety and happiness of other people, whether that's in sex or whether that's or in safety, whether you're walking down the street or trying to be safe from violence. So I think one thing I really want to make clear is trying to transcend simply what looks good and remind yourself, what feels desirable to you, what refusing to exist on this one-dimensional plane, and indulging in every dimension. So what tastes good, what smells good, what sounds good, what feels good to you, and maintaining this holistic approach in nurturing yourself and also the women and girls around you. like eating delicious food, dancing, being silly, like using your voice when it matters. Knowing that what makes someone desirable extends far beyond just the physical and refusing to exist in 2D, because, you know, you're not flat and you should refuse to make your world smaller when there's so much joy to be had. So, in conclusion, we have a huge amount of power to contribute to the next generation of women and girls, and we're taking up more power on the planet. We can start to create the spaces that we needed when we were younger, and hopefully create a more beautiful future for everyone, and we can start to create that now. That is my talk.